Previously on Battle 360. A new and improved USS Enterprise stormed the Gilbert Islands in a deadly encounter with the Japanese. Now, she's poised to deliver the same brand of punishment to Truk Atoll, one of Japan's largest and most important ports in the Pacific. USS Enterprise, a fighting city of steel. She is the most revered and decorated ship of World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, where threats loom on the seas, in the skies, and in the ocean depths, the Enterprise's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the war is all around you. Battle 360, USS Enterprise, Hammer of Hell. This series is brought to you with limited commercials by the men and women of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. February 15th, 1944. Central Pacific. USS Enterprise is steaming toward the Caroline Islands. She's not alone. On either side of her, stretching nearly as far as the eye can see, are 8 other aircraft carriers, 6 battleships, 10 cruisers, and dozens of destroyers. America's industrial might has finally come up to speed and reinforced the Pacific Fleet with adequate numbers of vessels to face down the enemy. Gone are the days of Enterprise venturing out alone as the only operational U.S. carrier. But while the force she accompanies today is large, it's a force that's facing a potentially cataclysmic battle. "500 miles ahead of these ships, at the heart of the Caroline Islands group, is Truk Atoll, one of the largest atolls in the Central Pacific. An atoll is an island formation in which a coral reef encircles a lagoon. The reef that rings Truk Atoll is 140 miles long and 33 miles in diameter, creating a massive lagoon that is home to 5 major islands and dozens of smaller ones. This island formation provides a very large and very secure harbor area, and the Japanese Navy typically anchors over 100 ships here.
It was, for the Japanese, one of the most important fleet operating bases that they maintained during the Second World War.
Many compare it to Pearl Harbor.
It had 2 ship anchorage areas, 3 or 4 airfields, machine shops, you name it.
3 of Truk's islands, Moen, Param, and Eden, contain airfields with runways, hangars, and fuel storage facilities. The main island, Dublon, is home to headquarters and communications buildings. To protect these extensive assets, the atoll is bristling with anti-aircraft batteries. Based around weapons like the dual-mounted Type 89 127mm gun. A fearsome aircraft menace, it delivers a 5-inch, 50-pound projectile and can pick off aircraft at altitudes up to 25,000 feet. Carrier aircraft rarely operate above 20,000 feet. Truk's anti-aircraft batteries are on most of the main islands, and a few are even hidden in tunnels burrowed into hillsides. USS Enterprise fighters and bombers will soon face those guns. Enterprise and her massive task force are on a mission. Target, Truk Atoll. Objective, USS Enterprise aircraft will destroy enemy ships at anchor, crater airfields, and explode parked enemy bombers. Strategy, Enterprise fighter planes will gain air superiority, while dive bombers sink enemy ships, and torpedo bombers decimate airfields with contact bombs. The U.S. Navy must neutralize Truk as a bomber base. The Americans have begun an island-hopping campaign to reach Japan, and bombers from Truk can disrupt the strategy.
The faster that we can chew up the Japanese air forces in these regions, the quicker that we can move on, hop to the next island chain, and get closer to the home islands.
But the Japanese, no doubt, will defend Truk ferociously. Assaulting the island fortress is an intimidating prospect for many men on Enterprise.
It's difficult to convey the sort of sinister air that Truk had about it during the first half of the war. Partly that was due to the fact that so little was known about it. The Japanese had occupied Truk for years and years. They had never let any Allied naval observers into this region of the world, and so far as we knew, it was this Central Pacific Rock of Gibraltar, if you will.
The fortified promontory at Gibraltar, of course, is an icon for invincibility. Iowan James Ramage, then a 28-year-old dive bomber pilot, recalls when he first got word of the proposed attack on Truk. He and fellow pilots were conducting their daily workout.
I can remember we were pushing a medicine ball around the flight deck one day, and Air Group Commander came around and he said, "We're going to Truk." And all I could say is, wow, because that was their stronghold, and it was kind of a bogeyman.
February 16th, 1944, 6:45 a.m., morning of the attack. 12 Hellcat fighters launch from aircraft carrier USS Enterprise. The fighters join up with 60 additional Hellcats from other nearby carriers, and the combined force of 72 planes speeds toward Truk Atoll. The Hellcats' mission: gain air superiority. Take out any Japanese Zeros that come up from Truk to meet them. 90 miles southwest, 7:15 a.m. More than 50 enemy fighters take off from airstrips at Truk Atoll. Their mission: intercept and kill the encroaching American fighter planes. The Zero is more maneuverable and has a longer range than the Hellcat. But the American fighter is faster, has better armor and better armament. And most important of all, American pilots are far better trained than their Japanese counterparts by this point in the war. Soon, when enemy meets enemy over Truk's outer coral reef, it's a frantic, murderous aerial clash.
There was all kinds of crazy air combat going on. It must have looked like fly soup up there. And about every 30 seconds or so, you could see a Japanese Zero on fire, steaming straight for the water.
But in the maelstrom of zinging lead from both Zeros in the air and anti-aircraft batteries on the ground, 4 American Hellcats also tumble from the sky. This is no cakewalk for the Americans. In the frenetic maneuvering, each pilot constantly struggles to maintain orientation and separate friend from foe.
You know, you're not only concerned about your own aircraft, but you're trying to keep track of all your wingmen, and then you're trying to track where the bogies are. You're trying to take into consideration all the visual factors that are out there. You have the sun, you have all these bad guy planes, you have all these good guy planes, and you need to make sure that you most effectively prosecute them.
And of course, These aerial shootouts are all by eyesight only. The pilots have no modern advantages of radar, heads-up displays, or electronic locking on target. They have no high-tech help at all. Pilot Don Flash Gordon gets a shot at downing enemy Zeros just as he crosses over Truk's outer reef. His plane is part of a section of 4 Hellcats from Enterprise. Gordon already has 3 kills at this point in the war. His first 2 came in October 1942, when he downed 2 Japanese Kate torpedo bombers in the Battle of Santa Cruz. His third came just 2 weeks ago in an early morning attack on Taroa in the Marshall Islands.
I saw through the clouds in the airfield, and then on top of the clouds, 5,000 feet below us, were 8 Zeros spread out, no formation. So we made one pass, and 3 of us got a 0.
2 more kills, and Flash can lay claim to the coveted designation of Ace. He is hoping today is his day, and the opportunity is, at present, directly in front of him. 2 miles ahead, and 45 degrees above Don Gordon and his section. 4 Zeros are making an attack run on the Americans. It's 4 on 4. Gordon spots the enemy Zeros first and goes for his guns.
The Zero's 12 o'clock, and pulled up my nose, and I got the leader. And the section leader got 1, and my wingman got 1, but number 4, he wasn't lined up for the 4th guy.
Don Gordon has his 4th kill. He's only got 1 more to go. Elsewhere, the mid-air jousting over Truk Atoll continues. Across the lagoon, the pilot of a riddled Japanese plane bails out. But the pilot's clothes are on fire. He burns to death swinging beneath his parachute on the way down to the water. In roughly an hour from the start of the explosive action over Truk, the combat in the sky diminishes to occasional flashes. Straggling Zeros making futile last jabs at the American squadrons.
Our 72 planes took command of the air. And as far as we were concerned, the only fighters that were left were strays.
Not a moment too soon. 10 miles northeast, a squadron of 12 torpedo bombers from Enterprise meets another from USS Yorktown, the new carrier named for Enterprise's sister ship, lost at Midway. They are just finishing their 90-mile flight from the American task force and are starting to reach the edge of Truk's barrier reef. The American torpedo bomber aircraft are Grumman TBF Avengers, the state-of-the-art. With a 1,700 horsepower engine, the Avenger is armed with 3 50 caliber machine guns and 1 30 caliber machine gun. It can carry either a single Mark 13 torpedo, 2 1,000-pound bombs, 4 500-pound bombs, or 12 100-pound bombs. Avenger air crews select the type of bombs they'll deliver based on mission. Torpedoes for striking ships beneath the surface of the water. 1,000-pound contact bombs, bombs that explode on contact with the target, for attacking the decks of the biggest ships. 500-pound contact bombs for attacking ships or exploding buildings on the ground. 100-pound contact bombs for smaller vessels, smaller buildings, or for cratering airstrips so the enemy cannot launch or land planes. Delay fuse bombs for very low-level bombing raids, which allow the bombers to clear the target area before detonation. This way, the bomber itself does not get caught in the blast.
Yeah, quite a variety.
24-year-old Californian Tom Watts is a radio man and bombardier in a TBF Avenger.
So you could select, like if you wanted to drop 200-pound bombs at a time, you'd select it on your little panel. You know, the pilot would tell you how they want them dropped.
The bomb panel has 12 toggle switches. The bombardier configures the switches to determine the number and pattern of bombs released. But the pilot himself actually triggers the release with a switch on his control stick. The mission today is to attack airfields, multiple hangars, and runways. So each plane is loaded down with multiple explosive weapons. 6 100-pound fragmentation bombs and 6 100-pound incendiary bombs. Fragmentation bombs contain shrapnel. Incendiary bombs contain multiple bomblets filled with flammable material. The case opens at altitude, releasing the bomblets, which ignite on impact. But before the Avengers can drop their payloads, they have to make it to their various targets. Airfields on the major islands of Eaton, Moen, and Perham, 6 miles inside Truk's barrier reef. It's a challenge, because the moment the Avengers begin crossing the barrier reef, anti-aircraft guns open up on them.
You can see it when they start firing at you. It'll start exploding up there in your altitude.
These guys are trying to get to their target with all the flak exploding around them and maybe taking a little piece out of their wing here and there. You know, there's nothing you can do to defend yourself. You're in major formation, so you're not going to be doing massive unplanned jinking maneuvers because you're going to run into your fellow pilots. So you just fly on through it and hope for the best.
The torpedo squadrons doggedly press forward to their various objectives. Flak is bursting all around them. Tom Watts' aircraft is part of a 3-plane formation headed for the airfield on Eden Island. Amid intense anti-aircraft fire from both land batteries and ships in the harbor, Watts' formation, led by Lieutenant Russell Kippen, scatters its bombs. The explosions crater runways and demolish workshops and hangar buildings. In the confusion of the moment, Lieutenant Kippen mistakenly chooses a dangerous route to exit the harbor.
Instead of taking a clear route out, what their lead pilot did is he actually took them between a row of 2 transport ships. And what happened then is both those ships started firing on him on either side.
Looking upward from the bombardier well of his Avenger, Watts can see tracer rounds passing in both directions over the top of his airplane. Tracer rounds are magnesium-coated bullets that glow red-hot as they streak downrange. The red streaks show gunners the paths of their bullets so they can adjust their aim.
And all he could do was lay there and hope he wasn't going to get hit.
Luckily, we were going at pretty high speed, and so in a few seconds, you're out of there.
As the 3 planes head out to sea, 10 dive bombers are incoming from USS Enterprise. They buzz in to attack the ships in the harbor. They're hoping to get a crack at the carriers and battleships. But for these pilots, there's some initial disappointment. It's immediately obvious that the Japanese have anticipated this attack. Most of their combat vessels, the large battleships, aircraft carriers, and cruisers, are absent.
The Japanese had gotten a sense that bad things might be in store for Truk in the relatively near future, and so in the middle of February they pulled out the majority of their major fleet units and moved them back to places like Yap and Palau.
Although their biggest vessels have safely steamed 1,200 miles away, several dozen ships still remain, mostly support ships like transports, tankers, and freighters. But a few warships are also present: 3 cruisers, fleet auxiliaries, and at least 8 destroyers. Losing such a vast collection of shipping could devastate enemy operations in the Central Pacific for some time. The Enterprise dive bomber pilots, James Ramage among them, quickly select their targets based on size and proximity.
I picked the biggest one, freighter.
With anti-aircraft fire coming at them from all directions, and stray Zero fighters streaking through the harbor area spraying lead. The pilots nose their planes over into a 70-degree dive angle.
Our attack was pretty canned. It was a vertical dive from about 10 to 12,000 with a release at 2,000 and out by 300 to 500 feet.
As the dive bombers nosed over and then streaked down toward their target, they dove in alongside Dublon Island, which had heights up to 1,000 feet. And so, as they approached the ships that they were about to bomb, right at the altitude where they would begin the process of pulling out, the Japanese had weapons mounted on top of Dublon Island that would fire on them from the same altitude.
The Dauntlesses successfully passed through the gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire. Hurtling earthward, they released their 1,000-pound contact bombs. Bombs large enough to damage a battleship and designed to explode on contact with the targets. No need for delayed fuses here. The bombers will pull out high enough and soon enough that the exploding bombs will not endanger them. Moments later, multiple vessels and Truk's primary anchorage between Dublon and Eaton Islands explode with stunning violence.
I can remember looking over to the port side and I saw a ship go up. It looked like the A-bomb later on. I mean, tremendous.
Once Ramage has released his bomb and pulled out of his dive, his attention immediately shifts to seeking other targets. He may have dropped his only bomb, but he still has bullets, so he's not going anywhere.
As we came out, there were 2 Japanese patrol craft, probably about 90 feet. So we had the 2 twin 50s forward, and we shot up the 2 patrol craft.
The half-inch diameter 50 caliber bullets perforate the hulls of the patrol craft and explode stored ammunition on one of them. Rear seat gunners continue strafing the burning, listing enemy vessels as the U.S. bombers climb out of the harbor area and head back toward Enterprise and the waiting task force. The hammering of Truk Atoll continues throughout the day. As Enterprise and Yorktown bombers make their way back to the task force, squadrons from other carriers swoop out of the sky toward the Japanese stronghold to continue the assault on enemy ships and airfields. Bombers from USS Enterprise make additional runs throughout the day. And when evening darkness finally brings a pause in the action, the Big E has broken its record for tonnage of bombs dropped in a single day. More than 900 tons. For exhausted air crews, the evening break brings a welcome rest. Truk, so far, hasn't lived up to the intimidating pre-battle speculation. But the danger is far from over. And late in the evening, as some men aboard Enterprise eat, some sleep, and others prepare for watch, the Japanese unleash a nasty surprise. Bogies. Unidentified incoming aircraft start appearing on the ship's radar scope. As the bogies near the carrier force, their identity is quickly discerned. They're Japanese twin-engine Betty bombers, and they're closing in for a retaliatory night strike on the American ships. It's not an easy mission for the Japanese Bettys. The U.S. carriers and their escort ships are blacked out. All exterior lights are extinguished, precisely so enemy bombers will have a hard time finding them. Still, the Bettys press forward doggedly. When they near the U.S. task force, battleships and cruisers on the outskirts of the American formation open up with their guns. The carriers themselves, like Enterprise, a prize target for the enemy, remain quiet and dark.
USS Enterprise at night would stay blacked out because they didn't want to give away their position. And what the 5-inch guns on the deck would do, they'd wheel it around and orient it to where the bogey was coming from. But they couldn't open up on the bogeys because they didn't want to give away their position.
The guns of the warships on the outskirts of the task force chase away the bombers initially. But the Bettys are persistent. Just after midnight, men on the deck of Enterprise see an indication of enemy success.
Off in the distance, a white flash came over the horizon. And come to find out, it was the USS Intrepid that actually did take a torpedo.
One of the Betty bombers wiggles through the task force defenses and strikes the fellow carrier. It's a costly blow.
11 men that night died, and 17 more were wounded.
The American task force remains on alert until early morning, when the Japanese Bettys finally break off from their evening of stalking. Enterprise herself is still safe, and she has not had need to fire her guns and give away her position. But now, it's the Americans' turn to deliver a little nighttime chaos. In late 1943, the TBF Avenger torpedo bombers aboard USS Enterprise got some new technology. Airborne radar. American admirals wanted some of their aircraft carriers to be able to fight at night. Enterprise Avengers are outfitted with wing-mounted radar antennas and an internal scope for the radio man bombardier in the well of the plane. This distinction falls to the Avengers for purely practical reasons. Torpedo bombers are bigger than the fighters or dive bombers, and the new radar gear is bulky and takes up space.
It wasn't too great. They had Yagi antennas under each wing, and you had to move the antenna back and forth. It didn't do it automatically like present radars. So in order to position the scan on your tube, you had to move these antennas.
Today's aircraft, by contrast, you have computer assist dials and multi-function interface screens to control your radar search area.
Despite the rudimentary state of the art of this new nighttime search system, for the first time, a naval bomber, theoretically, can both navigate and locate enemy targets in darkness. Hitting those targets using radar is another matter, and many experienced pilots have their doubts. But the commander of the Avenger Squadron aboard Enterprise adamantly believes it's possible. Lieutenant Commander Bill Martin, a 6-year naval aviation veteran, has faith that radar will allow his air crews to deliver some nocturnal hell to the enemy. Weeks prior to the action at Truk, during stopovers at both Pearl Harbor and Espiritu Santos, Martin ordered night training, navigation, and bombing practice with the new radar systems. Confident his squadron could operate proficiently at night, when planning for the Truk offensive began, Martin urged that a night raid be part of it. Now, at 2 a.m. on February 17, 1944, day 2 of the assault on Truk, Bill Martin's torpedo bombers are launching from the Enterprise flight deck. They are setting out on the first nighttime American carrier bomber attack of the Pacific War. Ironically, the officer primarily responsible for the remarkable event is not with them. In a freak accident 2 weeks ago, Lieutenant Commander Bill Martin slipped while exercising on one of the ship's steel decks and broke his elbow. No amount of pleading has convinced his superiors to let him lead the mission anyway. So Martin must watch his 12 bombers launch, one at a time without him, and wish them well. The Avengers quickly form into a tight squadron and begin the 90-mile journey to Truk Atoll. After roughly an hour's flight, the last several miles at an altitude of 500 feet to skirt below Japanese radar, the bombers come within range of Truk's barrier reef. They're vulnerable at only 500 feet of altitude, but they believe the danger is mitigated because they should be invisible to anti-aircraft gunners in the blackness. They get a surprise.
As they were flying in, one of the planes starts taking all this fire, and they can't figure out why am I taking all this fire? You know, it's at night, they're not supposed to see me, they can't see me, what's going on? And then he looked down, and he realized that he had his running lights on, so he just flipped them off and continued on with their mission.
It's a close call, and this incident has added to the danger for the bombers because it's marked their intended path for the anti-aircraft gunners. Minutes after crossing the reef, the 12 Enterprise torpedo bombers separate into groups of 4 and approach Truk Harbor from multiple directions. Individual planes then peel away from their groups to swoop in and inflict radar-guided havoc. The Avengers zero in on the enemy ships that show up as the biggest blobs on their radar scopes. Among the targets in the water below are 2 tankers and 11 freighters. As each plane starts its bombing run, it climbs to 1,000 feet to gain momentum. Then it swoops down to as low as 250 feet above the water to release its bomb.
When they dropped their bombs, they would have to be on a delayed fuse, because they were flying so low, if they didn't have it on a delayed fuse, they would also blow themselves up.
This give you about 3 to 5 seconds to get away, then it would blow up.
For nearly half an hour, in the face of intense but inaccurate anti-aircraft fire, the Enterprise Avengers continue making runs on the harbor. Desperate to aid their anti-aircraft gunners, the Japanese strike a spotlight and frantically search the darkened sky. Finally, with their bombs expended, the torpedo bombers climb away from Truk Lagoon and head for home.
When we left there was several ships burning in the harbor there.
2 tankers and 11 freighters are damaged or sinking. The bombers make it back to Enterprise and begin touching down on the flight deck just as the sun is peeking over the horizon. 12 Avengers went out, but only 11 returned. What happened to the missing plane is still unknown. Even so, the mission has been a success.
It's the first time that aircraft carrier-based aircraft took off and then used radar to guide themselves into the target area, deliver their ordnance, and then return to the carrier at night.
Night carrier landings are especially difficult because of poor visibility. The only illumination on the flight deck is a dim strip of lights down the center. A pilot must depend on the LSO, landing signal officer, to position him properly for landing. The LSO uses lighted wands to signal a pilot to raise or lower his plane as he approaches. The altitude must be exactly right, because to force his plane to drop down to the deck, a pilot actually kills his engine. To stop, the plane's tailhook must catch one of several arresting wires. If the plane is too high when the engine stops, it will overshoot the arresting wires. If the plane is too low, it will hit the end of the flight deck and fall in the water. Proper night landing takes much practice, and many Enterprise pilots have experienced rough landings getting the hang of it. The morning of February 17, 1944, brings 3 more bombing raids on Truk Atoll. Anti-aircraft fire persists, but with only a few enemy ships still limping across the Japanese anchorage, the damage brought by the raids is negligible.
At that point, it was even agreed that they were getting to a point of diminishing return. And with the diminishing return situation being what it was, further attacks that were on the schedule for the afternoon of February 17th were canceled. And the Enterprise collected its air group and left the area.
For the Americans, it's been a gratifying day and a half. And Truk, for now at least, is no longer a threat to the U.S. Navy's island-hopping campaign. Enterprise and the rest of the U.S. Carrier Task Force retires to Majuro Atoll in the conquered Marshall Islands to refit, resupply, and press their campaign forward. Resupply especially is critical. Men can't fight well for long if they're hungry. And feeding the 2,500 men aboard Enterprise means pumping out 7,500 meals a day. That takes a lot of food and a big operation. Enterprise has 3 dining halls, or messes, located on her 3rd deck, just above the engine rooms. 1 for lower-ranking enlisted men, 1 for chief petty officers, and an officer's mess, or wardroom. There are 7 men, on average, preparing and serving food in the kitchens or galleys. The bakery has 10. There are 2 butchers, and 1 man is assigned to the spud locker. Breakfast offerings are eggs, hash browns, hot cakes, bacon, sausage, and toast. Lunches are usually soups, sandwiches, and desserts. Dinners: meats, potatoes, canned vegetables, spaghetti, and garlic toast. Men stand in line for up to an hour to reach the serving line. and get an average of a half an hour to eat on folding tables and benches. Waste food is ground up, mixed with water, and dumped overboard. Grinding and diluting the leftovers prevents leaving a crumb trail for the enemy to follow. For the moment, the enemy at Truk Atoll is in no shape to follow. But the Japanese do not plan to give up on the outpost just yet. Second Battle of Truk Atoll. In mid-February 1944, aircraft from USS Enterprise and her sister carriers devastated the most heavily fortified Japanese naval outpost in the Pacific, Truk Atoll. Thousands of tons of shipping sunk, dozens of bombers destroyed on the ground. But just 10 weeks after this hammering of the Japanese outpost, new aerial reconnaissance photos have revealed a worrisome development. The Japanese have repaired much of the damage from the attack and have refortified the atoll as a bomber base. The Japanese must not be allowed an airbase from which they can disrupt the American island hopping efforts. And in the pre-dawn hours of April 29, 1944, USS Enterprise and her fellow carriers are back in the waters off Truk Atoll to pummel the vexing outpost once again. The aerial reconnaissance photos make clear that Truk Atoll has again become a formidable defensive bastion. The Japanese have added many new anti-aircraft gun emplacements, some radar-controlled, a technology that makes the weapons much more accurate. It will, again, be a perilous job for Enterprise bombers to approach the atoll to take out the new airfields. Once again, this morning's attack leads off with a sweep of the skies by Hellcat fighters. The fighters launch in the pre-dawn darkness to clear the way for the bombers to follow. And again, pilot Don Flash Gordon is among them. Gordon is eager. He knows that today might be the day he makes his 5th kill and wins the distinction and status of ace. With the fighters on their way toward the target, dive bombers and torpedo bombers begin launching from Enterprise and other task force carriers. James Ramage's SBD Dauntless dive bomber is among them. And in the seat behind him is enlisted air crewman Dave Cawley.
Cawley was one of the greatest men I've ever known. We were very close.
He's there to operate the radio on the aircraft, but then also to operate the aircraft's twin A&M 230 caliber machine guns called Stingers. The SBD was equipped with 2 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns that were in the cowling firing through the prop arch. And then, of course, the pair of 30 caliber machine guns on the flexible mount.
Fired by pressing thumb levers, the dual-mounted Browning A&M 2 30 caliber machine guns can spit out 1,300 rounds per minute each. And with a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second and a range of 1,100 yards, the Stinger, as this weapon has been affectionately dubbed, is a fierce defender against attacks by Zeros from the rear. SBD bombers routinely test-fire their machine guns once they get in the air.
Well, Dave Cawley, that morning, as they were in the air on the way to the target area, swung his 2 30 caliber machine guns off to the side of the aircraft to put his rounds in an area that was safe where no other aircraft were. And he fired one burst. After the first couple of rounds, one of the weapons made a really, really loud boom. And then he felt something that he compared to being hit across the leg with a baseball bat. And what had happened was his A&M 230 caliber machine gun had a round that exploded in the breech. When the round exploded in the breech, it stripped the ejector off of the bolt of the weapon, and of course the weapons ejected their spent brass straight downward, so the ejector was mounted on the bottom side of the bolt. It stripped the ejector off with an explosive force that propelled that ejector downward and into his thigh.
The metal is lodged next to Colley's thigh bone.
He looked down and he could see that he was cut, he could see that he was bleeding. He knew he was in bad shape, but he didn't even say a single word to Ramage. He didn't want to have the mission canceled, he didn't want to lose the chance to fly the mission. So, with the ejector from his .30 caliber machine gun wedged into his thigh, he flew the mission.
Many miles out ahead of the bombers, the Hellcat fighters cross Truk's barrier reef and prepare to meet a storm of angry Japanese Zeros. Enemy fighters are in the air, but the aerial combat is less intense than last time. Many Zeros seem timid and uneager to engage. Still, one Enterprise Hellcat pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade Bob Kanzi, does suddenly find himself in a blistering aerial shootout. Kanzi and a Zero go head-to-head, charging each other and firing all the way. The two fighter planes pass each other, smoking and on fire. Both pilots bail out. Kanzi drifts toward the water at the south end of the lagoon. Luckily, his survival gear includes an inflatable raft. But alone in hostile waters is the last place a pilot wants to be.
Your first priority, especially in colder waters, is to get out of the water. You're gonna hit the water, you're gonna want to release your coke fittings to get rid of that parachute. Parachute saved your life getting to the water, but once you're in the water, it's your worst enemy because it fills up with water and it becomes a sea anchor. So you need to pull out your shroud line cutter and get away from that parachute, and then you need to physically get yourself into the life raft and out of that water environment.
Kanzi does just that, but once he's in the raft, his survival challenge has just begun. He's in the lagoon itself, between the islands and the outer reef. He must pick a direction in which to paddle, and only one makes sense.
He knew that he had to go out to sea, not back towards land, which most people would want to go towards land, but that was occupied Japanese territory. He knew his only way that he was going to survive is he had to get as far away from that land as he could and hopefully be picked up by an American ship.
The downed pilot paddles to the reef, climbs over it, and starts paddling out to sea. Unfortunately, Kanzi must spend the night on the water. While Bob Kanzi is extricating himself from Truk Lagoon, Enterprise Task Force bombers spend the rest of the day streaking into the lagoon to pummel parked planes, hangars, and bomber strips on the island of Moen. The bombers also pay special attention to anti-aircraft batteries on Moen, exploding gun emplacements, and occasionally sending long metal barrels hurtling skyward. Darkness brings an end to the assault. But to the good fortune of Bob Kanzi, the action resumes for a few final bombing runs the next day. April 30th. On the morning of the 30th, strangely, the anti-aircraft fire from Truk seems to have intensified and possibly become more accurate. The flak takes down 3 TBF Avengers from Enterprise. Fortunately, all the crew members survive. Luckily for Bob Kanzi, one of the returning Avenger pilots happens to look down at the right time and spots Kanzi drifting in his rubber raft. The bomber calls in the downed pilot's position to a task force escort vessel, the battleship North Carolina, and a float plane launched from the North Carolina heads for Kanzi's location. The float plane is crewed by 2 men, but it's very small, too small to lift off with a 3rd passenger. So the plan is for the plane to pick up Kanzi and simply taxi him to an awaiting submarine. the USS Tang, for transfer. When the float plane taxis up to Kansi, the downed pilot climbs out of his raft and lets it go to swim to the plane.
And as he reached up, the plane was so small, reached up, and when he grabbed the wing, the plane actually flipped over and capsized, and now he got 3 people in the water.
The plane sinks, and now all 3 men are stranded, supported only by their life vests. A second plane from North Carolina is dispatched.
Now this time they're very careful about what, they knew what happened before. What they did is 2 of them crawled up on each wing at the same time, trying to balance it out, and one straddled the tail. And what they did is they just basically motored to the USS Tang, which was a submarine, and then they offloaded onto that, and then they were safe.
Later in the day, a similar operation rescues 8 other Enterprise Task Force pilots downed by anti-aircraft fire. The formidable Japanese hideout has proven to be a paper tiger. The assault on Truk has decimated a vast and irreplaceable quantity of Japanese shipping and bomber aircraft in the Central Pacific. 3 light cruisers, 4 destroyers, 3 patrol craft, and some 36 merchant ships and auxiliaries.
They left a lot of ships there, and I'm glad to report we got them all.
The Japanese have also suffered the loss of some 270 aircraft, fighters, and bombers. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers, sailors, and air crewmen are dead. And the loss of support facilities and airfield infrastructure is momentous. Enterprise is responsible for 1/3 of the enemy's total loss. American forces, on the other hand, have suffered 1 aircraft carrier damaged, 25 aircraft downed, and 40 air crewmen and sailors killed. Fortunately, rear seat gunner Dave Cawley, the air crewman wounded by his own machine gun, is not among the fatalities.
When they landed back on Enterprise, he of course got some medical attention. When the medical department examined him and x-rayed him, they found that the ejector from the weapon was so deeply lodged in his leg that they were either going to have to just close him up and just let him keep the ejector wedged inside, or they were going to have to perform major surgery. To perform major surgery, it was going to take him off of the flying schedule for several weeks. So he told them, "Sew me up." And he kept it for the rest of the war, the ejector from his weapon still lodged in his thigh.
Pilot Don Gordon never got his chance at a 5th enemy fighter during this second attack on Truk. But he has been lucky enough to live to fight another day. And the elusive status of ace might still one day be his to claim. For the stunned Japanese, Truk will be of no further use for the rest of the war.
When the reports first filtered back to Imperial Naval Headquarters that they had lost 220,000 tons of shipping, one Imperial Naval diarist said that the shock was beyond comprehension. It was a truly devastating event.
The enemy is never able to keep Truk sufficiently resupplied, and many of the surviving Japanese personnel on the island go hungry. For U.S. naval commanders in the Pacific, Truk is now a threat removed. And this accomplishment will help clear the way for much bigger fights to come. The American island hopping campaign is now targeted at the Marianas, and a great battle above the Philippine Sea is in the offing.